Bentornati al podcast di Dr. Supercoach. Sei d'accordo con il maiale?
Thank you, Google Translate. That was Italian for welcome back to the Dr. Supercoach podcast. You're on with Pig. Why was the intro in Italian, you might ask? Well, I'll answer that question when we get to our point of difference recommendation, but that's a little clue for you. First, let's recap last week. Last week gave us plenty of good captaincy scores, including Goulden, Grundy and Flanders' 150 plus efforts. So if you got onto those, you'd be pretty happy. I vice-captain Heaney. He didn't really have the big spike score I wanted. He was playing that Geelong easiest midfield in the comp to score against, but didn't really do what I wanted. So I fell back on Max Gawn and I was pretty happy with those efforts. This week we have 6 teams on the bye. So the player pool that we have to choose from is quite diminished. This week is also extra tough because a lot of our popular captain options either have the bye or have a difficult matchup. So I'll be recommending some unconventional captain options for you this week because a lot of those unconventional guys have a nice fixture and I think they should score really well. So this week, don't be scared to take a 120 VC if you get it this week, maybe even a 115. It could be a strange week ahead. I normally don't say that. I'm normally trying to aim for 130 pluses, but this week is a little bit scary. So I haven't done this before, but I might just give you some names that they don't make this video, and I'm not going to discuss them further. But you could consider these guys in your captain planning, and they're probably more relevant for your draft leagues due to their favourable matchups. So those guys, Josh Dunkley, Bailey Dale, Toby Nankervis, Dylan Moore, Carl Amon, Mitch Hinge, Lockie Whitfield, Kieran Briggs, and Dan Houston. So there are some guys that I think have really favourable matchups that I won't discuss here, but they could be draft options. So let me know in the comments if this is something you want me to do more of, kind of give a few more names that could be draft considerations. Otherwise, I might just stick to the classic captain options. Let me know what you want. But now, let's discuss those classic captain recommendations. My number 3 vice-captain is Lachie Neale. Lachie Neale has a 3-round average of 135 and a 5-round average of 130. The rounding Brownlow medalist is not slowing down yet. There is a big flag here that Neale could cop the Windhager tag or even have Steele go head-to-head with him. Steele's done that a few times, like his matchup with Tom Green earlier in the year. They just went head-to-head and Steele beat him, and Tom Green scored poorly. So that's the only reason that Neale isn't higher on this list. Having said that, St Kilda are a positive matchup for inside midfielders over the last 5 games. So the beauty of a VC is that you can take a ping at a guy with one of the best ceilings in the game, and if he does get off the chain or they don't tag him, you are laughing, locking away a big score in the first game of the round. Neale has scores of 137, 114 and 123 in his last 3 matchups against the Saints, so that's really good. But here is the kicker, the Gabba. Lachie Neale is averaging 136 points per game at the Gabba this year. He's always scored well at Brisbane's home ground, and this year he's taken that to another level. So I think this is absolutely worth a VC punt. And if he avoids the tag, it's going to be huge. If he gets tagged, so what? You've got another option to hit a good C score. My number 2 vice-captain option is Jordan Clark. So Jordan Clark cracks my captain video for the first time this year. Well done, Geordie. After averaging 137 points over his last 3 games, he is on fire. He's the main attacking defender flowing out of Freo's backline and delivering up the ground. Plus, he gets involved with the sideways chip-chip action with him and Luke Ryan that kind of pads both of their stats. So Jordan makes his debut in this video due to the favourable matchup he has this week. The Bulldogs are a favourable matchup for both attacking defenders and designated kickers. That fits Jordan Clark to a T. And we know that running defenders play well at Marvel. They've got, with the closed roof, the lack of wind, it is kind of easier for those guys that kind of peel off, get kicks and marks. It is worth noting over the last 2 weeks, these types of players haven't really dominated the Bulldogs as we expected, so there is that little bit of a flag. But with a vice-captain, we don't really mind about the flag, the upside's there. But if we go back a little bit further than 2 weeks, we can see guys like Goulden scored a 131, Blakey scored a 120, Himmelberg scored a 139, Haynes scored a 116, and Whitfield scored 112. So they've all scored really well against the Bulldogs as you know, that similar type of player. Jordan Clark has shown his upside this year, and he's a great high ceiling VC, I think. So I think he's a really good choice. But the number one vice captain option I think every single person should be looking at is Dane Zorko. So Lachie Neale slotted in as my number 3 vice captain option, but my number 1 goes to his ex-captain, Zorko. Zorko can be one of the best scorers in the game on any given week. He's already got 2 160-plus scores this year. Not many people have that. This is the perfect opportunity to add to that. Playing against St Kilda, who are the easiest matchup for opposition designated kickers to score against, and by a long way. You want to target those players who take the kickouts and who have the ball in their hands a lot against the Saints. And Zorko does just that. We just saw Bodie Yulin score 157, Sam Flanders 152, Collins 126, and Joel Jeffrey 121, all dominated against St Kilda from a Supercoach perspective, all in the same week for the same team. In fact, I saw a Jaden Poposky tweet that said last week was the highest combined score for 7 defenders on one team ever. So Saints are just absolutely giving up huge points to defenders. I could go back through previous weeks and show you examples of where other defenders have scored well against St Kilda, but I think you already know that this is the case. We've talked about this so many times. Is there any reason that Brisbane and Zorko won't feast like the Suns did? I wouldn't bet against it. Additionally, just like Neale, Zorko is averaging 136 points per game at the Gabba this year, from scores of 105, 127, 130, and then that 160 and 161. They've both come at the Gabba. Zorko VC will be very popular this week, and I think you'd be crazy to go against it. I think you should just lock this in. Now we go to my pod vice captain. My pod recommendations, pod being point of difference, by the way, if you don't know that. So these are someone that not very heavily owned or someone that people probably aren't really considering vice captaining, and I think maybe you should have a think about it. My point of difference recommendations have been on a heater over the last month, averaging 151 points over the last month. So I feel like there's a little bit of pressure to keep this up, but who can I recommend to keep up that hot streak with only 12 teams playing? I might get a little abstract here, a little risky, recommending someone that hasn't scored over 123 this year. That doesn't sound great, but I will now reveal why the video intro was in Italian. It's because we're heading to Sicily. James Sicily, that's where we're heading. Why am I recommending someone who's been a shell of his former self? It's purely the matchup. Hawthorn play Richmond this week. Richmond are the easiest team for defenders to score against by a long, long way. James's last 3 scores against Richmond are 171, 118 and 141. So he absolutely loves this matchup. In fact, James Sicily averages 112 points per game from his 8 career games against Richmond. That's easily his highest scoring matchup. So when I say James Sicily loves playing Richmond, that is an understatement. And we do have to note, yes, James Sicily in 2024 is nothing like James Sicily in 2023, but I can see this particular game being his big spike score for the year. And I think it's going to have non-owners kind of cocking their heads and maybe being a bit interested in trading him in after their bye. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that's the play. I'm not saying that for the rest of the year he's going to be great. But if you own him, this is a really nice time to have a look at a VC. This recommendation is based on targeting a player with a giant ceiling against the easiest matchup in the league. Remember, Dane Zorko's 161 and Luke Ryan's 197 came against the Tigers recently. So this risk is risky for sure. A lot of my pod vice captain recommendations are risky, but they're a point of difference. They're something to go against the pack and try and get a big score. And that's why I'm recommending for James Sicily. This could be his biggest score of the year. And I got to play some Italian music. So let's go to Sicily. Now my captains, let's get a little bit serious now because these big boys, if you went for a Zorko or you went for a Clark or you went for a Neale or a Sicily, whoever it is, and it didn't work, these are where you need safety to fall back on. So super safe is number 5 is Tristan Cherry. So this is actually Cherry's debut in my video as well. So we've actually got quite a few players debuting this week. And as I said, there's some wacky matchups coming. So it gives me an opportunity to give some guys a debut in the video. Tristan Cherry, because Collingwood are an easy matchup for opposition ruckman when Darcy Cameron is solo rucking. This year, Cameron is winning the hit out in 43% of his ruck contests compared to Mason Cox's 50%. So what that means is that Collingwood are an easier matchup when Cox is out. Cameron is easier to win a head out against than Cox is. That makes sense. The last 2 ruckmen to play against Collingwood have scored 131 and 132. Granted, those 2 players were Tim English and Max Gawn, who are a level above Tristan Cherry, but we shouldn't overlook the North big man. A 3-round average of 115, highlighted by the 131 last week against West Coast, show he's in good form. Cherry also has scores of 144 and 133 against easy matchups this year, which kind of highlights his ceiling, and he doesn't have a bad floor. I wouldn't expect a 140 in this matchup, but I'd be happy to suggest it should be a safe 120, which might be just what you want if your high ceiling VC doesn't work. Then we go number 4 is Zach Fisher. Zach is another player who makes his debut in my captain's video this week, and he deserves it. With a 5-round average of 116, highlighted by a 140 against Gold Coast in round 9. Well, now Zach gets a matchup with Collingwood, who are giving up the 3rd most points to opposition designated kickers over the last 5 games. Fisher's getting so much of the ball right now that I actually think he's a fairly safe captain option. He hasn't dropped below 113 in the last month, and I'm sure you'll want to hear some scores from other designated kickers against Collingwood recently. Well, here you go. Trent Rivers, 111, Christian Salem, 111, Bailey Dale, 132, Jordan Clark, 134, Luke Ryan, 132, and Mitch Hinge, 124. So that just shows that Collingwood are a great matchup for defenders, and Zach Fisher is in hot form right now, and I think he should take advantage of this matchup. Feels a bit weird recommending Zach Fisher as a captain, especially after what he's done in previous years, but I actually think he's really safe this year, or this week in particular. Then my number 3 captain option is Will Day. So here's a 5th player making his Dr. Supercoach captain video debut. That's crazy. Out of the 9 players I'm recommending here, 5 of them are first-timers. Well, like the others, Will Day absolutely deserves this spot on this list. Will has scores of 142 and 137 in his last month, and the other 2 paired with a 117 and a 107. So 2 big spike scores and 2 solid floor games as well. Well, this week he gets the juicy Richmond matchup. The Tigers are giving up the 5th most points to inside midfielders over the last 5 games. But considering the 4 easiest teams all have the bye, you could look at this as the Tigers are the easiest team for inside midfielders to score against this week. We look at some scores against them recently. Jordan Dawson had 117, Bowes had 146, Durham had 122, Merritt had 119, Neil 162, and then all in this same game, Richards had a 163, Treloar had a 153, Harms had a 139, and Bond had a 135. Whew. I need to take a breath because all those teams have feasted on Richmond in recent weeks. Will Day is the in-form player of that Hawks midfield, and he should be the latest member to benefit from this matchup. I think he has a really safe floor with the potential to go really big. Now, my number 2 captain option, this is where we start getting really safe and really high upside. I love these 2. My number 2 is Caleb Serong. Caleb returns from his bye and returns to the captain video. Currently the highest averaging pure midfielder in Supercoach, and he has an easy run home to end the year. You should expect to see this man feature plenty more times in this video. But let's look at this week. He plays against the Bulldogs, who he loves playing. His last 3 matchups with them have led to scores of 140, 138 and 130. Monster numbers. The Bulldogs generally don't tag, and I expect Serong to run free in this game. In my round 2 video, I went back and had a look at that. You might recall that I flagged that Serong has been very poor at Marvel Stadium in his career. At that point, he was averaging 83 Supercoach from his 10 matches at Marvel Stadium. Well, he shut me up. He went off for 141 at Marvel that week, and then he backed it up with a 118 at Marvel in round 10. So I am willing to say that Caleb Serong no longer has issues scoring at this venue. It is worth noting that the Bulldogs are a hardish matchup for inside midfielders over the last 5 games. That's why Caleb isn't higher on the list. Having said that, Neil 134, Dunkley 156, Dacos 156, and Warner 144 have all gotten a hold of Bulldogs in the last 3 weeks. So it isn't unrealistic to expect Caleb to have a nice captaincy game here. I think that's generally going to happen. But my number 1 captain option is Luke Ryan. Luke Ryan returns from his bye, and geez, I miss the peroxide prince. My team just didn't feel the same with him on the bench, and I might reward his return with the captain armband. Second in the league for Supercoach average in 2024 and not looking like slowing down. Luke has gone over 120 in all of his last 3 matchups, and he has spike scores of 165, 145 and 197 already this year. Well, this week a rested Luke Ryan gets the matchup with the Bulldogs, who, as I mentioned earlier when talking about Jordan Clark, they are a very nice matchup for designated kickers. If you look up designated kicker in the dictionary, you will see a picture of Luke Ryan. He takes kickouts, he takes marks, and he's always involved with the switch plays that Freo love, getting the ball in his hands. When talking about Jordan Clark, I mentioned some great defender scores against the Bulldogs, so I won't repeat that. What I might look at is some recent defender scores at Marvel Stadium and see how that venue might affect Luke. Well, Lachie Jones 115, Bailey Dale 132, Nick Blakey 120, Carl Amon 117, James Sicily 115. They've all done well quite recently there. But the biggest example was last week's Saints vs Suns matchup, which was at Marvel, and as we were aware, there was that Euland and Flanders going 150, Collins and Jeffrey going 120. They all had a field day. But even on the other side, Jack Sinclair also smashed out a 147. So I guess what I'm saying here, this just illustrates that there can be some huge scoring gains for defenders at Marvel. There weren't as many maybe as I thought, so the ground necessarily doesn't lend itself to higher score. It's not like I'm saying defenders score better at Marvel, but what I'm saying is it certainly does not inhibit them. And Luke Ryan should take advantage of that and the favourable Bulldogs matchup this weekend. So there we go. As promised, I've given you some different names this week to some of our, and that's due to some of our popular players having a bye or playing in a hard matchup. I mean, we look at guys like Bont and Butters. They've got really hard matchups for inside midfielders. Guys like Heaney and Warner and Goulden, they're travelling to Adelaide. That could be tough. Sometimes it's not. Well, who else? Dacos just got injured and he's playing North, so I actually really would like that if we knew he was fully healthy and good to go. So Dacos against North is maybe someone that you could look at. But, you know, Max Gawn on the bye, it's getting a little bit tough for who we should look at this week. So that's why I've given you some different ones. So just to recap, Lachie Neale and Dane Zorko in the first game of the round, I think are great options. The 3 Freo boys, being Jordan Clark, Luke Ryan and Caleb Serong, are all awesome options. And then James Sicily and Will Day against Richmond, I think could have a field day. And Tristan Cherry and Zach Fisher against Collingwood. I also like those matchups for them. So they're my recommendations for you. I will be looking to vice captain Dane Zorko. I just love it when the player I think will be the highest scorer on my team happens to play in the first game. That's such an easy vice captain. I think everyone should be vice captaining Zorko. I hope to have the VC wrapped up by Friday night. I don't really expect to need anyone else. But if Zorko fails, I'm very comfortable in falling back on any of the 3 Freo players mentioned in this video. At this stage, it'll probably be Luke Ryan for me, but I'm not expecting to need any of them after Zorko is finished with the Saints on Friday night. So that's all from me. Please hit subscribe. Let's try to get us up to 2,500 subscribers. Follow me on Twitter at pig_DRSC, and I will chat to you next week.